So thanks for being here, everyone. We're going to talk today about how we might tell people about the work that we're all doing in our communities. And we're doing it with an eye toward how we can have those conversations in ways that build broader support for the arts, not just the arts that we're doing, but arts that are all around us all the time. So we're going to talk about some research that we did where we learned what people love about the arts. So what they love about the arts without us having to persuade them or share any data with them or anything. It's just sort of what they naturally love about the arts. Why did we do the research? Well, the arts are vulnerable in the public conversation. So as you can see here, like this meme of Romney laughing about the possibility of arts funding. That's not something I created. It's something that actually exists on the internet. And it's there because we've all seen it happen, right? Where elected officials will target the arts as an example of something that they know the public thinks doesn't make sense as something to fund with our tax dollars. And then we have a bunch of other examples of this. And you might think to yourself, like, well, why do they do that? It's probably, I think, because these elected officials want smaller government. They want to be able to reduce spending. And they know that if they offer an example that doesn't quite make sense to people as something that should get public funding, then that will help them make their case for smaller government. It's not that they hate the arts, they actually don't. They will tell you, as a clip from Romney will show you, that they like the arts. But it's a great example for them because of the default thinking that the public has about the arts. And then Bill Donahue, the Catholic League president, is another example. He made these comments about why should the working class pay for the elite, as he describes them, when the working class prefers professional wrestling. And it wouldn't make any sense to us if we tried to subsidize professional wrestling, and that's why he's trying to make that comparison. So therefore, why should we be subsidizing the arts?
Well, my test is a program so critical that it's worth borrowing money from China to pay for it? No. And the answer, so on that, I can say some things that you might say, I like the National Endowment for the Arts. I do. I like PBS. We subsidize PBS. Look, I'm going to stop that. I'm going to say PBS is going to have advertisement. We're not going to kill Big Bird, but Big Bird's going to have advertisements, all right?
Just think back a couple of weeks ago when they were talking about eliminating funding for the national endowments for the arts and humanities and public radio and public television. The budget director said something to the effect of, why should I ask poor people in West Virginia to pay for public radio? And so you get that kind of sort of, an us versus them approach to the arts, with positioning the arts as something that only rich people or the elite do, right? This is another example. Steve King, this is an old example from Steve King. He's been kind of in the news a lot lately because he's such a Trump supporter. What he said was, this was in a debate on the floor of the House about funding of the National Endowment for the Arts, and he was comparing, again, people arriving in tuxedos, getting out of limousines at the expense of the poor person who is in blue jeans and sneakers. So why do they do this, right? Why do elected officials position the arts this way, the public funding of the arts? I think it's not because they hate the arts, as we'll show, and sort of like Romney said, right? I like the arts, but they're going to say public funding of the arts is inappropriate but they know how most people think about the arts, and they're doing it not because they care particularly about that teeny tiny piece of the federal budget that is funding the arts, but because they know that helps make an example of a budget item that most people would say, kind of scratch their heads and say, why are we paying for that with our tax dollars? Doesn't make sense to them. And so it's a way of advocating for a smaller budget or more limited public funding or reducing the federal budget and tax contributions. So when we started doing the research, what were we looking for? This is where I get to tell you a little bit about framing science. Framing science it's different from polling and marketing, but we sometimes do survey work, and certainly The results of the framing science research can be used in marketing. But polling and marketing are typically kind of moments in time, right? When you do a poll, you have something you're trying to do pretty immediately, and you know exactly what that is, and you can design your survey work to accomplish that goal, whether it's elect somebody tomorrow or position a particular public issue in a certain way. Marketing, you may be trying to sell tickets or museum memberships, or I don't know, cold medicine, whatever. Framing science is different, and in framing science, this is just an example of some of the work that Topos has done. Environmental advocates will talk about the watershed. And when they talk about the watershed, they want to protect the watershed, right? And what do people think about when they use the word watershed? Water. So people think about like a body of water. But actually the watershed is more like this, right? And so it's an example of how framing your policy issue, choosing the words you choose, can have an impact on what people hear, how they think about what the policy solutions are, who they think can solve the problem, all of those things. And that's this kind of default frame that people carry around with them in their heads. We all do it. And so we interpret the world around us using those frames. We may not even, honestly, typically are not aware that we're doing it. It's just that we're bombarded by so much information. It makes it simpler if we can use those frames to filter information. And to give you an idea of kind of how that works a little bit is, if we all walked outside, actually not here in Seattle where it's raining and there's probably no stars in the sky, but if we were where I live in Ohio, and we walked outside together in the night and looked up in the sky, saw all the stars, we'd all look up, but we might all be looking in different parts of the sky, right? But if somebody came along and said, do you see how those stars together, if you link them with a line, make the shape of a Big Dipper? Then we would all be seeing the Big Dipper together. And that's a frame, okay? So that takes a lot of disparate information and provides everybody the same way of thinking about it. That's how we can frame a conversation. A lot of times, I know I am guilty of this myself, advocates will take data or a story and they will put it out there without putting the frame around it, not realizing that the words you're choosing and the messenger you're choosing may actually have an impact on how people are hearing what you're saying, and it's not what you think it is and what you want it to be. I was reading some stuff on the plane here. Who's heard of George Lakoff? Yeah, so George Lakoff is a framer. He does framing science work. And he's retired now, but he's been doing some talking about how Trump supporters hear what Trump says. And this was an article about, actually it was fascinating, it was interpreting Trump's tweets and thinking about it in terms of communications work. But ideas don't float in the air, they live in your neurocircuitry. Every time ideas in our neural circuits are activated, they get stronger, and over time, those complexes of neural circuits create a frame through which we view the world. The problem is that frame is unconscious. You aren't aware of it because you don't have access to your neural circuits. So you hear facts. If you hear facts that don't fit with your frame, you ignore them. Oftentimes, we've seen research that shows that. We'll give people data. If it doesn't fit their understanding of the world, they will literally flip the data, like completely misinterpret it so that it fits their worldview. So it's a reminder that, we really have to be careful about using data because it may not work the way that we think it does. In this article, there was a lot of talk about how data doesn't really work at all. Certainly there are some audiences we need to use it with, and definitely as a researcher, I would say it helps us make policy choices, but as a way to persuade or bring people to see the world the way that we see it, not necessarily that effective. So, why are we having this conversation here today? All of you guys are, you've gotten some ArtPlace funding, you're doing work that is community work through the arts, with arts. As you'll see from the research, that is a really effective way to build public value for the arts. And what we hope to accomplish here today is to share with you some tools for how to share information with the broader public about what you're doing, what you're accomplishing, in ways that will build that understanding in the public of the arts as a valued public good, and therefore something that makes sense to spend public dollars on, which is a problem that we have in the public dialogue right now. So what we want long term is for more of all of us to share, kind of create an echo chamber, so to speak, of sharing the work that we're doing in, I don't mean, it's not like you have to memorize a script. It's more like a checklist, which I'll actually show you at the end of this, that helps us share information about what we're doing in ways that we're building that public understanding, so that the next time we have this fight about the NEA, which actually might be this fall, so that might be too soon, but that we're getting to a place where the public sees the arts as a public good. Remember the conversation we had yesterday afternoon about how important that is, that we change the way that people think about the arts so that it's not such a struggle. And it's not just with Congress, it's also with your local leaders. It's with your local business leaders. It's potentially even with your donors or the people who are participating in the work that you do. Because changing the way that people think about the arts and moving it out of that category that it's something other people do is part of what we're trying to do here. Does that make sense? So one of the things, when we start this research, one of the first things we do is we try to find out, like, when we say the words that we've been saying about arts and culture, what do people think about? How do they react? They don't know what we're talking about. And this was, sad, right? This was very obvious. We were doing some focus groups, and the facilitator, who was from out of town, and the group was, it's a professional focus group company, so this was like people from all over the region, some of whom had experience with arts, some who did not. But when she asked them to talk about their place and tell her what she should do while she was there, the arts didn't come up at all. And so she asked them, what about the arts? And you literally could watch as around the table, people would like lean back and kind of cross their arms and try to figure out what the topic was. Because the topic, arts, didn't mean anything to them. Most people don't have what we would call a file that might, for us, be something like festivals, museums, galleries, dance, opera, symphony, music. Most people don't have that list in their head for what is arts and culture. And so they have to wait and see where the conversation is going. What they do think about is entertainment. And so the default way that most people have of thinking about arts is as entertainment, which, if you're trying to get people to come to your thing, great, right? Like, you want your thing to be on their list of what's happening this weekend among the choices that they have. But what it means is that people are thinking about the arts as consumers, just how they spend their time and money. That means that entertainment is really about a private choice and not a public concern. And so if it's really about a private choice, it's hard to make that leap to, and that's why we should spend our charitable dollars on it or our public dollars on it. So barriers, besides sort of this fact that people tend to think of the arts as consumers. The other thing they think about, so sort of once they know what you're talking about, the place they go is this thing that they may not call it high art or fine art, but that's what they're thinking about. And they think of that as something that, other people do. People in fancy clothes, people who are old, people who are white. And so that's a barrier too, right? Because for all kinds of reasons, that becomes a barrier to their participation, or they're seeing it as something that is worthy of public funding. So how have arts advocates reacted to this? If you're in the arts field, you probably know the answer to this, and if you're not, it's not going to surprise you. One of the main things that arts advocates do is talk about economic impact. We heard a little bit of this yesterday, and I will just give you a clue now that I think this will challenge some of what we heard yesterday, or at least thinking about how we position the economic side of the story. What we learned in our research is that the economic impact case, if you're making it in a ROI, return on investment, dollars and cents, $1 in, you get $10 back, doesn't work. It doesn't work in the sense that it doesn't work to build public understanding of the arts as a public good. I will grant you that if you're sitting with a legislator and you're lobbying a legislator, they often want that information, and you've got to kind of have it in your pocket and be able to hand it to them. But we've kind of conditioned them to expect that, as has basically every other sector in the world. So every sector does their economic impact study, and it's probably one of the reasons it's not working for us is that the public has become skeptical about how could all of these things possibly have all of that economic impact. But the arts suffer from an even more difficult challenge, which is that because for most people the arts are kind of, I don't know, low priority, when they're thinking about public issues, then they may nod their head when you give them this dollars and cents, $10 for every $1 in, but they're going to walk away thinking to themselves, there's got to be things that have a better return on investment than the arts. That can't be the main thing, the best way that we can have economic impact. And I'm going to give you a recent example of this.
You know that the NEA has granted to every congressional district in the United States. And I know you know that for every dollar the NEA puts into a community, $10 comes back. So even if you don't believe in the arts, which I know you do, I know that you believe in the right to bear arts, which is a campaign that was initiated by our president, the Creative Coalition president, Tim Daly, to ensure that every citizen has that right to bear arts. But
I'm confused.
I love the name,
the right to bear arts, and and as long as I can put arts in a holster, I'm totally for it. But we live at a time when there are more rich people than at any time in world history. So, just for example, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Warren Buffett together have more than $200 billion. The NEA gets, $150 million a year?
The
they
NEA
could fund it like that.
0.004%. That's a thousandth of a percent of the federal budget, and it brings in 10 times that amount. Let's just forget about the arts. Let's forget that the arts are what keeps America great. Let's look at economic development. I mean, I would assume that you're for economic development in this country.
Come on. I mean, look, there are lots of ways to fund economic development, but you can't tell me this is the most efficient way. But more to the point.
So that is a very typical reaction. And by the way, who's heard of the right to bear arts? It is a campaign that's out there. Interesting one. Okay, so what's the other kind of value proposition that arts advocates have used over the years as a way to make the case for public funding of the arts? It's arts education. And we're all for arts education, right? So that in fact, the organization that commissioned this work, we funded and supported arts education, and we were very disappointed to learn from the researchers that arts education as a value proposition doesn't work either. Why not? In the same focus groups, when the topic of arts education came up, the people in the room literally leaned forward and had a lot to say, and they're very animated about the topic of arts education. Why? They think they're talking about education as a topic, right? Everybody has their own experience with education. They think they're, an expert. They know what they would like to see changed in the education system, and so they get very animated and excited about talking about it. The problem is when you then try to make the case to them, and therefore that's why we should support funding of the arts sector, it doesn't work. They can't make that leap back to the sector from a conversation about education. And so the education conversation dominates, and you really can't translate that into that's why we should be funding the symphony or the ballet or the playhouse or our music festival. So the researchers told us, obviously we're not going to stop talking about arts education, and if you work for an arts advocacy organization, that's your reality. But she said, the researchers told us, the problem here is that this is like putting a kitten and a shark into a room together, and the shark, what will happen, right? The shark will eat the kitten. It'll be ugly. You won't hear anything more from the kitten. So in this case, education is the shark, arts are the kitten. don't do it. Just separate the conversations so that you talk about them in different places, different times. There's actually some framing science research on how to talk about arts education as a topic, but as a way to get either elected officials or the public to see the arts as something that matters to everyone, it's just not something that's been working for us. We also, in the research, tested a whole bunch of ideas. So when we do this kind of research, we'll typically talk to people who've been working in the field. We'll ask them for their suggestions for things that they think might work as a value proposition. In the research report itself, you'll see that we walk through these and explain why they didn't work based on the one-on-one, kind of hundreds of one-on-one interviews that we did where we test these ideas. So just so you know, I mean, there's a lot that we would think, like for us, it works. Or intuitively, we might think it would work for a broader group, and it turns out it doesn't. And there's just those are some examples of why it doesn't work, like the physical well-being one. So we talk a lot about the art's impact on health, and we have to do it very carefully because it quickly falls into kind of the arts are good for reducing stress, which again becomes that kind of like, it's a personal thing that people do, you know, with their time and money and based on their needs. And it's harder to make that case back to. That's why it's good for all of us. Not that it's impossible, I'm just saying, just as a main proposition, it's not been working. So these are the things that we found in the research. People think of the arts as a private matter. There's kind of a marketplace of the arts. They're good to be purchased. People expect to be passive. They expect the arts to be kind of presented to them. They don't feel like they need to contribute to creating the arts. And for most people, the arts, while they like them, they're a low priority. So we're looking for a message that positions the arts and culture as a public good, provides a clearer picture of what we're talking about, conveys the importance of people having their own proactive stance of taking action, and incorporates everyone in a region and not just those in urban centers, because you know, when people think about high arts and fine arts, they typically think about certain buildings downtown or on the coasts, and we want them to think about stuff that happens all across the nation. So we did learn some good things. Yeah, we did this research in like phases, and we learned all that stuff in the first phase, and then we had to come up with the funding to do the next phase. But the good things, and this is not always true of every topic that Topos does research on, because they'll do research on, you know, gun control and environmental issues and civil rights. In some of those cases, there's kind of an active opposition, right? You know, somebody who really believes fundamentally that the thing that you're working toward is a bad thing. That's not true with the arts. It's just like Mitt Romney said. He likes the arts. People like the arts. People think the arts are nice. So the problem, of course, is that the arts are not a necessary, and they don't see them as contributing in their daily lives, day to day, and in their community, and you know, all of those things that we know are true, but they don't see it. So the frame that we identified that works is this one. This is kind of shorthand. A thriving arts sector creates surprising ripple effects of benefits throughout our community. When we're looking for a frame at Topos, we're looking for something that works with the vast majority of people. So we're not looking for a frame that only works with the people who are sort of already in the family. We've got them, right? We're looking for them plus a whole bunch more people. There are always going to be some people we don't reach, but it's not like marketing where you've got, you know, 16 different messages for 16 different demographics. This is really one big idea that you can tailor as you need to, depending on who your audience is at a particular time. So breaking it down a little bit now. I don't know if you guys can read that. This paragraph is in the research. It is not that you have to memorize this paragraph at all. It's just a good kind of outline of what we learned works. Because in framing, too, ordering matters, the order in which you say things. But starting with that first sentence, why do leaders of cities around the country? Leaders of cities or local leaders are a trusted messenger. And that was something that we were looking for in the research. Find the trusted messenger. Local leaders can be all kinds of people. It can be your mayor. It can be someone who is serving in Congress, it can be your local chamber of commerce, it could be a community organizer. It could be, you know, anyone who's seen as a leader and caring about the local place. So it's that local focus that seems to matter. Why do leaders of cities think of arts and culture as important priorities? Because when creative activity is happening in large and small ways throughout an area, again, important language, large and small ways, right? It's pulling people away from that default that they run into where it's things that happen in that temple on the hill or that fancy building downtown or things in New York or LA. It's large and small ways throughout an area. It creates surprising ripple effects of benefits even for those who don't participate directly. Again, critical message. We were looking for something that people could see as benefiting themselves, even if they didn't think of themselves as goers or participants. And there are two benefits that the research identified, and this paragraph outlines them. The first is what we call economic vitality. Sometimes we call it neighborhood vitality. It's not the same as that dollars and cents case we were talking about before, but it has an economic aspect to it. It's that when we bring new arts forms, and here we use the terms theaters, galleries, concerts, that's that explanation so that people know the topic. You can throw any forms of art you want to into that sentence. Those things mean more energy and life in a community, more tourists, more renovated buildings, more families and businesses moving to an appealing place. So changing the way a place feels, changing the memories that are created there, making it a place people like to be. The second is a vibrant arts environment with music, storytelling, and community art centers also means more people coming together to share experiences and ideas, more opportunities for children to experience art, connecting with each other and understanding each other in new ways. So this is the connecting part of the story. So there's kind of a vitality part of the story and a people connecting part of the story. In this case, because the research was done in Cincinnati, we said Cincinnati has historically supported the arts and enjoyed the benefit of these ripple effects. We should be proud of what we've built and take responsibility for keeping our investment going. And that is kind of the call to action, right? We want people to feel empowered to take action. We actually tested the history part of the story. I mean, every place has their history of the art story, their investment or their cultural history. People like that, but if you start there, they kind of say, yeah, that was cool. We don't do that anymore. Like, we don't sit around after dinner around the piano singing. So that, like, it was a disconnect for them to think about it as a history. But as a call to action, that works. So I'm just going to stress now the importance of images and show you how you can illustrate these benefits with the images that you choose. This is an ArtPlace project in Detroit where they're doing storefront revitalization. And I mean, to me, this is a fantastic picture. Just all these different kinds of people there. It is both showing that kind of vitality of a place, but also the way that people are connecting in a place. Here's a series of photos that show you the difference, like different ways you can present something. This is, it's like a Veterans Memorial Hall. It's a beautiful piece of architecture in itself, and it's where a lot of art things happen, so you might put that picture, as somebody did actually, on their website. Or, same building, art happening in front of it, right? Completely changes the way you see the place and see whether it has a benefit to you. The first picture, kind of intimidating, right? Like, you don't know what's gonna happen when you cross that threshold, or what you're supposed to wear when you go there. Just a sidewalk with a beautiful architecture building. Same sidewalk, same place, just a whole different experience if you're walking by. This is a hip hop dance troupe, and the difference here, like people walking by here, people stopped, talked, took pictures, they created memories that they will share with others. They connected with strangers, they connected with the dancers, they connected with the dancers' parents. So it just illustrates the difference that the arts can make to a place when you show it this way. Crosswalk painting, it's literally vibrant and colorful and bringing people together. This is a picture from Irrigate in the Twin Cities, which I'm going to show you some video from them in a minute. But again, like just seeing the picture, the way that people are connecting to each other, the fact that they're experiencing the culture of one group, but it's a mixed group. People's Paper Co-op. It's another ArtPlace. Many of them are ArtPlace projects. But what I like about this picture is the active nature of it, the fact that people are talking to each other. It's not just people lined up or a picture of the art itself. These are just great images. And maybe I'm telling you stuff you already know, but probably in this room that you're more likely to be using, sort of documenting your art in this way or your community work in this way. I see a lot of art organizations with websites where they're basically, it's much more formal looking and much more about the art or about the musicians or the stage. And this interaction of people and the art is what's so key about all of these images. That, by the way, is my dad. And he is a retired clarinetist from the symphony, but he taught these kids in 2 different high schools how to play the tonette and created a tonette band for an event. There you go. Oops. This is warm cookies.
You go and exercise at a gym, and that's your physical health. You go to a religious institution for your spiritual health. Warm Cookies is a civic health club. It's a place where we can collectively exercise our community civic health. If we want to have a say in the decisions that affect our lives, we have to exercise that. We have to know what's going on, and then we have to decide what we want, and then we have to go and do it.
The value of communication and a dialogue within our community is needed. Action comes from that initial sharing, and building a community of people that you trust and want to be around inspires you to continue to want to be active and want to help create change.
I really do believe that in lots of ways we need to see a dramatic, systematic social change in our society, but that we're not going to see that unless we find ways to bring people together and warm them up to the idea first in ways that are comfortable and
I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but again, what's great about that video is just you've got talking heads, right? But you've got all those images of people doing stuff together. Some of it seems arty. I don't know exactly what's going on there, but it's that interaction that you're showing and showing something that looks very accessible. That's really helpful. This is a choir that was participating in something called the World Choir Games. Nobody's heard of it. It's the Olympics of choirs. It happens every 4 years somewhere in the world. And it happened in Cincinnati in 2012, I think. Thousands of people from all over the country came. And this group was listening. We had some street performers. You can't see her in this picture, but the woman kind of hidden there in the yellow dress, she was singing and playing her guitar, and this choir came up and kind of surrounded her. And after a while, this guy was like, give me your guitar. I mean, he didn't say, give me your guitar. He's like, give me your guitar. And so she did. She handed her guitar to him, and then he started playing a Justin Bieber song, which they all sang together. Art connects people. So again, this is in the written report, so you can look at it there. But this is, what the framing of, the ripple effects of benefits, connecting people, making places memorable and vibrant, moves you away from understanding the arts as something that's a very personal thing to something that is about the community, away from a private concern to a public concern, away from just the consumer view of things to a citizen view, and so on. So that's what the frame is designed to do, and why it's important to kind of think about how you're presenting the work that you're doing, so that you're moving people in that direction, so that we can kind of change this landscape of public understanding. This was the name of the organization that commissioned the research, the Fine Arts Fund. So, kind of a problem, right? So that was the old brand mark, and this is the new one. Extremely different, much more accessible. Naming is a fun project. We started with 600 names. And the reason that we chose this one, I mean, there was some testing involved, but Arts Wave is about kind of a movement, and which is sort of what we were aiming for, and something everybody can participate in, be part of. This was the old fundraising folder, right? I mean, of course, Paris, Berlin, Rome, Cincinnati, right? And that building, like I lived there, I grew up there. In fact, my parents played in the symphony in that building. And when I first looked at this, I couldn't recognize the building. All it looks like is some kind of fancy building, right? Sort of the exact opposite of what you need. So this was the folder that we created after we did the research. Before we changed the name, we went ahead and made changes to the folder. So you can see it's vibrant, it's colorful, it's got people in it, it's got people doing stuff in it. And then that, what you probably can't read back there, is kind of a shorthand version of that paragraph that we just walked through. So this was an old campaign image. So, the public is holding up the Shakespearean actor, right? And this is kind of a new way of showing the role of the arts and community. And this is the ballet interns dancing, in a public space. Public holding up the symphony timpani. And a guest artist from the symphony working with some students in one of the local programs. This I pulled from the web as I was on my way here. I think it's just a great way to frame creative placemaking. So look at, the headlines doesn't say a single thing about the arts or use the word creative placemaking, although it's in here. But anyone who plays a part in or has ideas about development and planning for their hometown, is that everybody? Pretty much, right? That's a really well framed, somebody did a great press release there. So let me tell you about this. ArtsWave does an annual free arts weekend. And hundreds of events, and families go out to all of these events. And the day of the event, I got a phone call from one of the TV news producers saying, hey, we'd like to do something about your event. And I'm like, yes, great. And he said, can you tell me the economic impact of the event? And I was like, crap, I don't want to talk about that. I said no, because obviously we didn't, it's happening right now. How could we possibly know the economic impact of it? But I said, I honestly think your audience is less interested in knowing those numbers and more interested in seeing what it looks like. And he liked that idea, so they actually ended up doing 2 stories. I'm going to show you just a little bit.
A big weekend for downtown businesses. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Curtis Fuller. News 5's Christina Cruz is live for us with how business is getting a big boost from the arts. Christina.
Well, hey there, Curtis. If you were out and about downtown this weekend, you know it was booming as thousands participated in many free art events around the area. One of the biggest draws was right here at the Contemporary Arts Center. Now, you probably recognize the notorious Hope and Change posters of Barack Obama. They soared to popularity during the 2008 presidential election. These are the works of artist Shepard Fairey. His political art, as well as 250 pieces from his body of work over the past 20 years, is currently on display here at the CAC. The exhibit, called Supply and Demand, opened yesterday and kicked off in line with the Arts Fun Sampler Weekend.
It's been a long time since I've seen this kind of energy. The arts bring it to us all year round, but this weekend really was very special. With everything from the surprise arts events that the Fine Arts Fund sponsored, to Shepard Fairey's new murals, to the parties taking place down around the city. It was really a wonderful time, and we should all remember that it continues all the time and be proud of it and support it.
Good evening. Behind me, the popular restaurant Nada is winding down, and that is not unusual for this time on a Sunday. But last night and the night before, this entire area was bustling with vibrant people willing to spend a buck after seeing a free exhibit.
The downtown chamber called me up afterwards. They're like, how did you do that? because that this is exactly the kind of story that they want to see about the city, and it changes the way anybody who's viewing it sees what's happening downtown, makes it look like it's really appealing to go downtown and go to these activities. So it helps people see the arts as something that's good for the whole city. So shortly after that, the mayor, Cincinnati's former mayor, was giving his State of the City speech, and his office called me up and said, hey, the mayor would like to highlight the arts in his State of the City speech. Do you have the economic impact data? So I said, well, we have this research. And basically it says, like, we appreciate the mayor's support. He's exactly the spokesperson we want, right? Local leader. But the research says what would really be helpful is if he used this framing instead of talking about dollars and cents. And so we sent over the language, and this is what he said.
Let me tell you about another area where we see that kind of return on investments. That's in the arts. Cincinnati arts, our music, our dance, our theater, our festivals, our museums, our galleries, they make this city vibrant. They bring people together. When the Aronoff has a show downtown, restaurants do much better than they normally do. When the Macy's Music Festival is in town, you cannot get a hotel room. And when the Playhouse in the Park has a play, you can't get in a restaurant in Mount Adams. I think that's just fine. The arts have a definite impact on our economy. And Cincinnatians support the arts like in no other community. You want to talk about great Cincinnatians? Folks that get this concept? Louise Nippert gave $85 million to the symphony last year. $85 million, that's a lot of money.
If I'd had my wishes come true, I would rather that he not give that particular example. But 85, it was a total game changer. It was one of the biggest charitable donations in the nation that year. So, and it really did change things for our symphony. He needed to thank her. But he framed it perfectly, right? He literally took the words and out of our research and then gave his own examples. And then he came back at the end and said, that's great that she can do that, but we should all do our part too. Which is, if you're going to talk about a big donation to one of the fine art institutions, that's kind of a perfect way to do it. He offered examples like the music festival and what happens in one neighborhood when the theater is having a show. So really, he's a smart guy. So shortly after that, I had to we were recording a video for something, and we stopped by his office and asked him to say a few words. And I promise you, I did not script him.
Art makes a difference. You can put a bench out at a bus stop and you've achieved your goal. You've given people a place to rest while they're waiting for the bus. But if you take that bus shelter and turn it into a piece of art, you've now created a reason for people to have conversation, for people to actually get to know each other, perhaps while they're waiting for the bus. I've seen bicycle racks that are no longer bicycle racks, but now they're a piece of art. So when two people are putting their bikes there together, they talk about this art and they talk about how this is so great. That's really a way of bringing a community together. Art has the power to do that.
So I just asked him, kind of an open-ended question about the role of arts in community, and he came up with those examples. But they're great examples. It's a way to talk about, it's just basic city infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. But you can change it fundamentally by thinking about doing it as art instead. It changes the way your city looks, and it brings people together, and he made those points. So when we invited Rocco Landesman, who was then the chair of the National Endowment for the Arts, to visit Cincinnati when we were relaunching the organization, changing the name. Turned out he agreed to come, which I was thrilled about, but it was probably less because we asked him and more because his best friend from summer camp lives in Cincinnati, and he had actually been there many times. But we took him to a neighborhood he hadn't seen before, and this is what he said.
I spent a good part of this afternoon over the Rhine. It's a term and a place that I'm just discovering now. All the times I've been to Cincinnati 100 times, I was never in this neighborhood. And the reason, evidently, is because it was a neighborhood where there was mainly drug dealing, violent crime, abandoned buildings. And now it's completely transformed, and the arts have had a huge role in that. You see You see art galleries as you walk down the street. We went up and visited the No Theater. This really is Exhibit A in what we're going to be talking about in the next 3 years at the NEA. How art and artists can transform a place, make it a completely different place. The arts can revitalize neighborhoods, and boy, is this a great example.
So it sounds like it came right out of our research. We were actually keeping the NEA informed about the work that we were doing. Jamie Bennett was actually there at the time. But this was Rocco's intuition of how you should talk about the arts, and it's why our town and ArtPlace exist, I think, because he really got that. But that's how, verbalizing it that way is exactly the right way to do it. And as it happened, our local paper was there to record that event, and they made that the headline of the story, which is exactly what we wanted. This is Irrigate, and Irrigate is an incredible example of how the arts can, an investment which ArtPlace participated in, can fundamentally change the way the media covers a story.
We have struggled since construction began, and even before construction began, with the narrative being this is going to be awful.
There's going to be a loss of business. People avoid construction areas.
When there is a big community disruption like construction, there's all this attention, but there's really nothing to cover other than the construction. And the only narrative there is, gosh, this is really hard. This really sucks. People are angry about this. Look at this big trench.
If you think navigating the construction around Washington and University Avenue is a pain,
it's just too difficult to get here.
Try owning one of these establishments.
People are going to move and businesses are going to fail and jobs are going to disappear.
So we just braced ourselves for every couple of months there would be a negative story about how hard it was.
Before we go, benches are not just for sitting anymore. A new one in St. Paul is proving that can be musical too. Sculptor Susan Solars created this bench made out of 270 PVC pipes.
Suddenly the stories started being about something else, and the stories started being about the Irrigate project.
Local artists like Blaine Garrett and Charles Denton find ways for you to escape. Call it a 36 by 7 foot piece of peace.
They were about this interesting, unusual, fun, weird project happening in the parking lot of Frogtown Square, happening inside my village, happening at Arnella's, happening at the Black Dog. And all of a sudden we kind of realized, oh, this is the thing. Like, this is what, it's the projects and the artist and the community member who build a relationship. It's the people who attend that project, but then the thousands of people who are reading about these projects, who might not even go to that weird project, in the parking lot, but who think, oh, something interesting happening in Frogtown.
Wow, there's really cool stuff going on the Central Corridor. There's this great business, and there's this great art show, and there's da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And it's helped shift the way people see the corridor, this idea of the narrative.
Generally, when we're in the news, it's because something bad happened. And I think more and more we're seeing, oh, here's this exciting art project that's happening. The more that we see those kinds of things, the more it influences the neighborhood, like getting people thinking about the neighborhood as a positive space and thinking other people thinking about it as a positive space where they can come, they can spend their money, they can, find a home, like all of those kinds of things.
I won't show you the whole thing, but you get the idea, right? So this is the ArtPlace investment, and how many people have heard of Irrigate? Yeah, it's a popular one. But the key here was not just, yes, they funded a lot of artists and arts organizations to do these pop-up activities all along the corridor where the construction was happening. The media, the way the media told the story made it a much bigger story because it reaches many more people than just the people who showed up at those activities.
This is attention getting. The people just love the idea of coming to the community. That's something they all just love.
This
this is how you do art, right? The tribal college poet writers are going to use it. Cecilia Fire Thunder can use it for her language program at Porcupine. Gus can use it for his drum making. There's actually desks in there where I'm getting computer laptops to put into the bus. That's sweet.
Artists need access to markets. Artists need access to business training. Artists need access to artistic training. Artists need a place to share community. And this idea of an arts incubator, a business incubator for the arts came out. And then the question was, well, how do we serve a geography as vast as Pine Ridge with 9 very distinct districts?
We'll be able to get the personal coaching from First People's Fund, from Lakota Fund. All of the resources will be there and accessible.
I can't tell you what we're bringing to these communities, and the options that we're giving them with being able to be mobile.
Art is an essential part of Native cultures around the world, and especially in the United States. So I think the ability now to bring the space to the artist in these remote areas is beautiful.
So documentation. These videos are great. We should probably, do, how many of you guys are doing videos of the work that you're doing? Yeah. I mean, you can get media coverage and that's ideal, but if you've got the footage that you can share with the media later or you can promote in your own ways, that's how we start building this shift in public understanding of the role that the arts play in communities. Here. So I'm going to show you this last video and then I'm going to give you a kind of a checklist for how to do this, use this work yourself, and we're going to do a little exercise with that. But let me tell you about this last video. After we started doing the research at ArtsWave, or what was then the Fine Arts Fund, we had the kind of the basic results, but we hadn't released the paper yet. But somebody sent me a video of one of those pop-up flash mob dances. This was 2009, so it was like before I don't think anyone had done one in the US yet. It was something in Europe. And actually it was the head of the ballet who sent it to me, and she said, Margie, that stuff you've been talking about, the way the arts bring people together and change the way people think about places, I think this is like that. Like, this is what that does. And so we looked at the video and we said, well, we really want to do that here. So every year for our annual campaign, our fundraising campaign, they'd always done a video, but basically it was shots of, like, you've seen this, ballet shoes on a stage and 100 people in black and white with their musical instruments on the stage, and business people, talking heads in their offices talking about how the arts are important to community. So I went to my boss and I was like, instead of that, can we film a pop-up dance instead? And she said yes. So we wanted it to be a surprise. So we sent email invitations to all of the arts organizations and asked them if their staff or board members wanted to participate in the making of the annual video. We couldn't tell them what it was going to be, but we promised not to embarrass them, and we had to make them promise to keep it a secret if they were going to participate. And surprisingly, 350 people said yes to that. So we organized lessons for people. So we put people into groups, and then we had donated space, and the ballet company taught people their part of the dance. And then the night before it happened, we all came together in a ballroom. So people who had learned the dance in like 2s and 3s and 4s, maybe as many as 10 people, suddenly they were with several hundred people seeing what this thing they had created together was going to look like. And I'm going to tell you, people cried. I cried. It was amazing. And then the next day when we were actually doing the performance, which was scheduled for our public square during a music festival, sort of like the kickoff of the music festival, and we had organized this with the festival operators to give us 5 minutes when the music would come on and the people who were standing around would suddenly start dancing, as you'll see. It rained. I mean, it poured rain. But everybody came. And this is what it looked like. We call this flash dance instead of flash dance. So I will say, at the time that we made it, I had a general idea of kind of why we were doing it and how it was different from what we had done before. But there are a lot of things that make that work, right? I mean, the fact that it looks like it is, in fact, real people. I mean, there were some professional dancers in there because the ballet helped us do it, so they showed up. But you know, mostly it looks like real people, and it is real people. And it's an incredibly diverse group of people, and it is in the public space. It is itself vibrant and changing, like, you know, it's a very memorable thing that's happening. It's connecting people, bringing people together, all different kinds of people who are co-creating something. So it's, you know, documenting things like that and showing things like that that are the power of your work is the way that we really change the way the public views the role of arts in place. And there are lots of ways to do that with all kinds of arts activities. So it just really takes, and it's work to do it, to make yourself sort of stop and think about how do we do that. So this is a checklist. I don't know if you can read it from the back. I stood in the back myself and looked at it, and I think you can. These are the important steps if you're writing a press release, you're putting together your newsletter, you're doing an invitation to something, you're putting together a speech for somebody. These are the things that kind of help make that case that we found really works to move people to a place where they're willing to say, yeah, I mean, I get it. The arts are something that I value in my community, and I'd be willing to make a phone call to my city council member or my congressman to say, this is important to me. The first is making sure that there is, you know, that the arts are part of it, right? So whether you are thinking about how to change the conversation around affordable housing or public transportation or education, there's got to be an arts component, and that's either because there's an arts organization or an artist involved in the work. Are the benefits, kind of the added value, coming from that artist or arts organization? Sometimes we say the arts can make the job of the doer or the elected official easier in a way. Like we can help make some other work easier to do because of the role of the arts organization or artists involved. A concrete description, that takes us back to that point about people don't know what we're talking about, so we have to tell them what we're talking about. Don't assume that they know what we're talking about. Telling the story of either vibrancy or connectedness or both, because those are the benefits that people already believe the arts provide if we can keep reminding them. So we don't have to persuade them with data or anything. They already believe it. It's just that's not the natural way they think about the arts. And if we keep telling them, it will start to become the natural way they think about the arts. Are there benefits to everyone, even the people who didn't come to the event? So, you know, the free arts events all around downtown, we're creating economic benefit, making Cincinnati a place people wanted to be that would be memorable. Those are benefits to everyone who lives there, even if they weren't downtown themselves. Behind the scenes, does the whatever you're putting together, does it help people understand that this doesn't happen by accident, but that it's something that people make happen? Whether it's your organization because you raised the money to do it, you brought the artist or the arts organization in as a partner, or you brought in the social service organization as a partner, whatever it is, reminding people of sort of how it happens. This is probably harder for you to do in your own example, but it's helpful sometimes to show more than one example about how these things happen, so that people start to see it as kind of almost like a system of things that are happening, and that makes it seem like it's not a one-off, but you know, these are many things that happen, and people can fit into them wherever they want to. And then, does the messenger support the idea of arts being helpful to everyone? So that's important too. Some messengers are going to be better than others at that. That's where we found the local leader is a really good messenger, because the local leader cares about everyone in the community. Mayors are a great example for this, but there are lots of other kinds of local leaders who can play that role. So, are there questions? Comments?
I'm from Phoenix. and we're experiencing downtown what used to be, what you would call gentrification. So downtown arts district that used to be filled with artists, and now all of a sudden people are thinking it's cool, and we have all these developments coming in and filling up the vacant lots, and now that vibrancy is starting to wane, and artists are starting to not want to be there anymore. It's not cool for them to be there anymore. And so I'm wondering, in that place, like, where did those artists come from that were doing those projects, and who did you say funded those artists?
So Laura Zabel, who was in the video, is here, not in this room, but she's here. So if you want really good information about Irrigate, go find her, and she'll tell you all the deal. But the funding, I think, came from multiple sources, but I know ArtPlace was a partner, I think NEA was a partner. And basically what they did was they put out a call to artists. So they got the funding, they put out a call to artists, and they did training of artists to make proposals for things that they could do along the line, and they asked them to partner with businesses. So they actually went out and, people interviewed the businesses and surveyed the area, and then came up with ideas that they then proposed and got funding to implement. And it went on for a couple of years. I mean, because the construction went on for a couple of years. So artists got paid, and they got training and support through Springboard for the Arts is the grantee in that case. Yeah, amazing project, really. And they, as you could tell from the video, that's not like a video that you would show so much about. I mean, there's some shots of the actual artwork being made. That video was really meant to document the impact on the media, and which is a crucial part of this, because what really changes the way that the public understands something is when the media starts presenting it to them that way.
No, and then we have so much of our grassroots media that is focusing on how terrible downtown is now, and it's not all that way, but it's that shifting of how do you get the media to shift focus.
Right.
Things that are happening still.
Right. So her question is really about how do you get the media to shift the focus? And I mean, Laura she could probably spend a couple of hours with you talking about how they did that, but I mean, really, just giving the media something different to focus on instead of just the construction or interviewing the business. Actually, when they went to interview the business owners would say things like, "Isn't this great? We have this huge black dog puppet coming down the street." So it changed the dynamic, and it's a powerful example of how the arts can change the experience of a place and the public understanding of what's happening there.